from you. Your peace you give me in time of the storm. You are the source of my strength. Oh, you are the strength of my life, and I lift my hands in total praise to you. Oh Lord, I will lift mine eyes to the hills, knowing that all of my help is coming from you. Your peace you give me in time of the storm. Oh, you are the source of my strength. Yes, you are. You are the strength of my life, and I lift my hands in total praise to you. Amen. 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 Amen.
Good evening, everyone. So glad you could join us on this very special occasion at McNeil Hall on the Rhodes College campus. On behalf of our president, Dr. Marjorie Haas, would like to greet you to be a part of this evening where we're going to be in conversation with some amazing individuals, and I'm honored to be part of this group. Dr. Haas is in New York on college business, but knowing her, she has her laptop open right now, making sure I don't mess up. Thank you for being here. My name is Russ Wiggins, and I'm Vice President for Student Life and Dean of Students. And I'm a member of the Rhodes College class of 1988. It's my honor to welcome you to Rhodes Remembers, MLK50. This program is part of the citywide commemoration of the 50th anniversary of the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. Prior to serving the college in this particular role, I was a faculty member in the history department and taught classes in African American and community history. And it's part of that role, which was a while ago, that I'm here tonight, and I do have the great joy of having built relationships with all of these fabulous people. Since our current campus opened in 1925, Rhodes alumni have played a significant role in the life of the city of Memphis. Tonight we will hear from and learn from Rhodes alumni and friends who will share their personal perspectives on the significant incidents up to and immediately following Dr. King's death. It's my privilege to introduce you to this extraordinary panel here tonight. Before doing so, as I entered McNeil Hall, I spotted a handsome, well-dressed, distinguished young gentleman by the name of Elmore Nickelberry. Some of you may know Mr. Nickelberry from the documentary film I Am a Man, in which it chronicled he and his peers, who were sanitation workers at the time, 50 years ago, for the Memphis sanitation workers, or sanitation department. That young Mr. Nickelberry is still working for the sanitation workers, sanitation department in Memphis, Tennessee. Mr. Nickelberry, please stand. The format this evening will, after I introduce all of our wonderful panelists, I will ask a couple general questions that a few of them may respond to, and then I will ask individual questions to each one of our panelists. Mike Cody graduated from Rhodes in 1950 with a degree in political science. He went on to obtain his law degree from the University of Virginia and was a member of Dr. King's legal team at the time of the assassination. Mike went on to become a member of the Memphis City Council, the Attorney General for the state of Tennessee, and U.S. Attorney for West Tennessee. He is in the Rhodes Athletic Hall of Fame, and the annual Mike Cody 4-Mile Classic raises funds for the Rhodes track and field and cross-country programs. In 2016, Mike received the Distinguished Alumni Award from the college. A member of the class of 1971, Carol DeForest came to Memphis via Austin, Texas, and was inspired to march with the sanitation workers during the spring of 1968. She graduated from Southwestern at Memphis with a bachelor's degree in art, and then obtained a second bachelor's degree in clay from Memphis Academy of Art. Carol is a well-known Memphis artist who has created public art projects for the City of Memphis, Urban Art Commission, and Le Bonheur Children's Hospital, among others. This year, the 30-plus surviving sanitation workers will be honored with the Humanitarian Award, each statue created by Carol. She's really good. When Kobe Smith entered Southwestern at Memphis in 1964, he was one of two black students. In 1967, he co-founded the Black Organizing Project, which then became the Invaders, a grassroots civil rights activist group that began organizing the youth of Memphis to combat police brutality, poverty, and racial injustice. Kobe met with Dr. King in his Lorraine motel room prior to the assassination to strategize on how to best support the striking sanitation workers. The Invader story is now an acclaimed documentary. Kobe graduated with a degree in political science. He then obtained his doctorate in education from the University of Massachusetts. Kobe continues to be politically active and has been an education administrator and consultant. Calvin Taylor was also a member of the Invaders and served as their writer and communicator. He graduated from Memphis State University with a degree in journalism and was a copy clerk for the Commercial Appeal while a member of the Invaders. Calvin was interviewed by Rhodes students about his experiences, and his interview is part of the Crossroads to Freedom Digital Archive. He currently serves as Vice President of the Memphis Convention and Visitors Bureau and Executive Director of the Memphis Tourism Foundation. Calvin is co-executive producer of the acclaimed film I Am a Man from Memphis, A Lesson in Life. Jocelyn Warsberg graduated from Rhodes in 1962 with a degree in anthropology and sociology. After Dr. King's death, Jocelyn founded the Memphis chapter of the Panel of American Women, a small integrated group of local women who came together to fight intolerance in Memphis. In 1969, she led a women's march on City Hall demanding the city and sanitation workers avert a second strike, which led to her appointment to the Tennessee Human Rights Commission in 1972. Jocelyn obtained her law degree from Memphis State University in 1979 and became the first professional mediator in Memphis. The Tennessee Human Rights Commission has named an annual Civil Rights Award in her honor, and in 2009 she received the Distinguished Alumni Award from Rhodes College. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a fine panel tonight. So I'm going to start by asking a few questions that any of you certainly should feel free to answer in relationship to March or during this period of 1968. First question, describe your life prior to Dr. King's first arrival in Memphis in March of 1968 to support the sanitation workers. Say a little bit about what your life is like.
Well, I wasn't woke yet. I was playing golf at the bridge at the country club. And once said, I think my heart's on a Freedom Ride bus and dealt the cards. So I just wasn't aware of my actual surroundings. And I thought the whole sanitation workers, this was a labor management fight. And I did not understand that it was all about race until after Dr. King was assassinated.
I, of course, was attending the University of Memphis. I was newlywed, had a young child, and for the most part, I was trying to go to work every day and figure out how to buy milk for the baby. Other than that, I wasn't doing very much, so that's the way life was going. I was a graduate of Father Bertrand High School, which made me somewhat different in the community in which I lived, because I lived right behind Carver High School. But other than that, it was just a normal everyday life.
Carol's going to make me go first.
Age before beauty.
You know, when I got out of law school, I came back to Memphis to work for a man named Lucius Birch, who had a law firm here and was sort of my mentor till he died in 1996. And at that time, Lucius was working to make changes in the community to integrate the libraries, the parks, getting people employed at the department stores, and consequently in that course of working with him, I got involved with the ACLU and began to work with the Freedom Summer people in Mississippi in voting rights. And I had met the first of our panelists, Dr. Kobe Smith over there on the end in 1964, when he and a young man named Lorenzo Childress became the first African Americans to enter the school in 1964. And they were both football players. And when Lorenzo got through practice one night, he and the rest of the players, some of them went over to the ranch house over there on Parkway and Summer to eat dinner. And the man that owned that restaurant, it was a very popular restaurant, would let everybody in except Lorenzo. And so the coach came and saw me and said, "That's not legal, is it?" And I said, "No, it's not legal." And so we went to federal court and filed a suit to let Lorenzo have dinner there. And the guy who owned that place closed it up rather than to serve an African-American person. And that was one of the first cases that I handled in the civil rights area. I met Carol when I was making an anti-war speech in Overton Park, and she was a young student over here that was out in the audience. And so we've all been friends, and I've known Jocelyn for many years, and so this is kind of going home for me.
I was a kid from San Antonio, Texas, who grew up in a culture that was 50% Hispanic. It was a joyful, music-filled, family-oriented culture. And I came to Memphis. My dad drove me. My dad was an Episcopal minister. He drove me from San Antonio up here, which was a 2-day in those days trip, and dropped me off and drove away. And I said, but wait, I don't know anyone. And he said, well, you picked this school, honey, get used to it. And so, as I've joked, I met a woman from Dallas who was standing right behind me with her daughter who was in our class, those three, all classmates. And she said, would you like to go eat some Mexican food in West Memphis with us? So that was, but in that first 6 weeks or so, I was very frightened because I had immersed myself in a culture that was so unfamiliar to me. Fortunately, in San Antonio, my dad knew the guy that owned the so-called black radio station. He allowed us to come every few months and get music, and I got Delta blues. So I did know a little bit about Memphis. I had never seen it before, had never been here. It didn't take long before I became friendly with the members of the Southwester staff, writers, artists, rabble-rousers, and hangers-on. And that group of people came together with the help of Carrie Fowler, who's now the chair of the board here. Who knew that would ever happen? And Carrie had been very active in civil rights as a high school student in Memphis. His father was a judge, Morgan Fowler, and Morgan Fowler had the good sense to tell Carrie to tell us how to act, what to do, and where to go when the marches started taking place. No drugs, no alcohol, get clean, look tidy, don't get into some boheme get up, just fit in as much as a white teenager could in those days. And it was a very powerful, life-changing experience.
I was blessed to grow up not far from here, about a mile over to the north. And I was riding with my mother past this building, and the students from Southwestern would be crossing the street, so all the traffic had to stop. So I became involved in listening to my mother say, now that's the way a student's supposed to act. She was so impressed I ended up here. I thought I was going to be a naval officer. I had gotten a principal appointment to the Naval Academy from then Congressman George Grider, and but it didn't come till the next year. I was too young to go the year before that, and so I selected coming over here, and then I fell in love with football. I don't know why. I needed another 100 pounds, which I now seem to have gotten. But I was just your plain average kid until maybe not your plain average kid. I belonged to the NAACP Youth Council, the Shelby County Democratic Club. In fact, I was the guy who ran Russ Sugarman's Warden Precinct system. For those of you who don't know about this, it was a black organization At that time, of course, and Memphis has been in a situation where blacks could vote. So we used to have block parties. And Russell had figured out this system where he would create block captains on every block, and that's how we would get the vote out. Well, a man named D. Army Bailey, who is a late judge from this area, D. Army had a driver's license, but he couldn't drive an upright transmission. I had an ego, so I would try anything. So D. Army and I were tied together. I drove the car, burned the clutch out. But we had an opportunity to engage in politics at a direct level. I was also involved in civic club activities. My purpose at that time was to demonstrate that the Negro of that day could compete with anybody, anytime, any place, anywhere. Now, when I met Mike Cody, I thought he was a kid in school over here, but he was the very first person I met on this campus. I didn't know then he had already graduated from law school. But we've developed a fast friendship which has lasted through the years. We keep running into each other at odd places. When I finally went to graduate school, Mike was there as well. I said, well, what is the thing about this guy? He can be every place I want to go. Here he is. But everywhere he's gone, and I've been there, has been great for me. So in '66, I met Dr. King during the Meredith March Against Fear in Mississippi. And we went down to join the march together in a car. In that car, we passed the Ku Klux Klan, which was the last car, then the White Citizens Council, then the Sovereignty Commission, then the FBI, then the reporters, then our march. So I had a chance to get to know Dr. King on a personal basis. We marched down the road every day, 100-degree temperature, and he would talk to me like I was his son. And I would listen because he had such a powerful demeanor. He never argued. I call these debates, but he always had a way of making his point. He could convince you to do almost anything. And I discovered then a man who had more courage and the ability to confront a problem than anyone I have ever known before or since, maybe with the exception of my father.
Thank you. Describe from your own perspective, if you may, the events of April 4, 1968. Anybody who wants to speak to that?
Well, I'll try to shoot through it in about 5 or 6 minutes. It's 2 days. It usually takes about 30 minutes to do it, but I don't want to do that now. But let me just give you the chronology, I guess, so that others can fit themselves into that chronology. I was a young lawyer, 5 or 6 years out of law school, but I've been working, as I mentioned, with the ACLU. It was actually on their national board, and there was a march here in Memphis at the end of the month of March, which was broken up. And Dr. King hadn't planned that march, but he was in the front of it. And when it developed turmoil and disorder, he was taken out of that place for his own safety. And when he got back to the hotel, he announced that he was going to come back to Memphis and organize a march himself, which his people, SCLC, would be in charge of, and it would be a peaceful march. And when he said that, the city went to federal court, and it was sort of a no-brainer. They told the judge, we just had a march. People were killed. People were hurt. There's a lot of looting, property damage. We can't let King come in and have another march because even it won't be safe for him. And so at that point, I got a call. This is April the 3rd, about mid-morning, from the ACLU lawyers in New York and in Atlanta. a guy named Chuck Morgan in Atlanta and Mel Wolfe in New York. And they asked if our firm would represent Dr. King to get the injunction lifted. They called me because I was the only lawyer they knew that lived in Memphis. And so I said, sure, we'll do it. But I quickly realized it was over my pay grade. But this guy that I had come to work for, Lucius Birch, was just across the hall. So Birch agreed to do it. He said he wanted to have us engaged, even though we weren't going to charge a fee. And so I had them send a telegram asking us to represent him. And he also said, I want to meet with Dr. King. So I called him, and they said, Dr. King has just arrived from Atlanta, and we'll arrange for you to meet with him at 3 o'clock on the afternoon of April the 3rd. So we went down, and we met with Dr. King that afternoon. The trial that would determine whether the injunction would be lifted or not was for the next morning, the morning of April the 4th. And so we were there with Dr. King and Andy Young and Jim Lawson and others in the Lorraine Motel, planning for the hearing the next day. Some of us went with Dr. King to the Mason Temple that night, where he made the last speech of his life. The next morning, April the 4th, we were in federal court, 9:30. The city put on its proof, which took up basically the morning. And then we put on our witnesses. There were just two. Andy Young, who later became United States Ambassador to the UN and Mayor of Atlanta. He and Jim Lawson, the local minister that was in charge of the sanitation workers' demonstrations, was the other witness. And at the end of that day, Judge Brown has back in chambers and announced that he would allow the march to take place and for us to go prepare an order for him to sign the next morning, April the 5th. And of course, within an hour or less of that time, Dr. King was shot at 6 o'clock on the balcony of the motel. So that was sort of my 2 days involved in that.
Well, I'm going to follow up with you, Mike, with another question. As a student at Rhodes in the late 50s, you were interested in racial equity and civil rights for all, and you organized the Inner City College Student Council in an effort to bring Memphis college students together across racial lines. What inspired you to get involved in that way, and how did your fellow students respond to these progressive efforts?
You know, I don't know how. All I know is when I came here, I hadn't read much other than a classic comic. I was not much of an academic. I got to come here because the school I went to, East High, didn't have a track. And so my coach would put me on the back of his motorcycle and take me over here to Rhodes, and I'd run around the track with the college kids. And one day the coach came up and said, "Son, where are you going to college?" I said, "Well, I don't have any money. I'm probably going to go to the Army, and then maybe I'll go to college later." And he said, "Well, would you like to come here?" I didn't know Southwestern from CBU or Memphis State because I wasn't planning to go to college. And he said, "Would you like to go here?" I said, "Sure, but I have to have some money, and I can't pay for it." And he said, "Well, have you done anything at your school other than run?" And so I said, "Well, I've done some student government stuff." And he said, "Well, come back in a couple of days and we'll talk about it." And they gave me a scholarship to come over here to Rhodes. And I met a guy named Jameson Jones, who's the dean, who was my mentor for the rest of his life. And he gave me two opportunities that changed my life. One was he gave me a fellowship to go to England and live for the summer. And it was the first time that I'd been with African-American kids who were my peers, students. And I got to see a side of life that I'd never seen before. The next year, when I was president of student body here, he arranged for me to go to the National Student Congress in Ann Arbor, Michigan, where again, I worked with kids of all races. And those two experiences changed me. And when I came back for my senior year, I sort of picked up on that. And, you know, students' reaction is just like students' reaction would be today. You know, some reacted differently than others. But I don't think, you know, crazy, back then, I remember one time the Hungarians had a revolution and they got their freedom, and then all of a sudden the Russians sent tanks in and they were crushing these students in the revolution. And so I was writing editorials and preaching about how students ought to get involved in helping these Hungarian students. They were freedom fighters, and the response was, you know, the student government should spend more time dealing with the caliber of the food in the dining hall than worrying about what's happening to the Hungarians. But there were others.
I feel like that was a comment directed especially at me. Students and food.
But you know, Rhodes College, everybody that's here has a sense of this. I think all these people that are alumni do. It gives you a shot of guilt about service. It feels like if you're not serving in some capacity other than just making a living for yourself, that you're not doing what you should do. And Jameson, Jones, and others instilled that in me, as you can see they did with these other people.
Sure. Thank you. Jossie, I'd like to ask you a couple questions. Tell us more about the Memphis Panel of Women. Why was it founded? Who were its members? And how do you think the group impacted the civil rights movement?
The Panel of American Women was the speakers program, and the simplicity of it somehow made it extremely engaging and popular. All it really was a panel of 4 women from different ethnic backgrounds. We had a Catholic, a Jew, African American, and what we called a white majority. And we went around town, we're invited, and just talked about prejudice and how it affected our lives. And it somehow, some way, just captured people. You wouldn't think something that simplistic would. We lasted a decade. We spoke to probably 1,000 or so engagements over that period of time. And it began to be a symbol in Memphis that you could interact interreligiously and interracially, and it looked like a hell of a lot of fun, which it was. we were having a great time. And it showed folks that I get calls. We want to integrate our charity board doing this or doing that. Do you think any of your panel people would be willing to serve since they already are engaging interracially? And that's what we want to do. And it, Lord, it almost became a power broker just passing out appointments all the time. It was really kind of fun, to tell you the truth. And it was just a mild introduction to human rights. Mm-hmm. But we did have one experience. The police department got under a court order, I guess after the Elton Hayes situation back then, and needed and was required by the Justice Department to do race relations sensitivity training. And they said, oh, we've invited the Panel of American Women. And I said, no, you don't get away with that. We're just a mild introduction. You're going to have to do something more important than that. It somehow was just right, because after Dr. King's assassination, which was for me the most transformative event in my life, mm-hmm. It turned my life completely upside down. I know that sounds so strange to hear, but I attended a meeting afterwards of a group gathered by John T. Fisher and Nat Landau, created something called Memphis Cares. And it was at that session, it was at Crump Stadium. The platform was on the 50-yard line, and we were in the the only stadium that ran east and west in the country, which was terrible for the sun, for the football players in the other direction. Anyway, we were full, and it was integrated. And I heard a lot of political stuff and a lot of rhetoric going on, but there was one woman there that captured my heart. Her name was Mary Collier. She was a mathematics teacher at Melrose High School. And she spoke that this was about race and the unfairness of racism. And I went home that night. I found her in the phone book. I called her up, and she would speak to me. And I said, I don't understand. Please help me understand. Aren't these just New York union people going to come and take money away from all the sanitation workers? We called them garbage men back then. How indignant. Sorry, Mr. Nickelbeer. And she said, no. And what she said to me was, how many white people have you seen driving the truck? I said, none. She says, how many black people have you seen driving the truck? And I said, none. She says, how many white people have you seen come into your backyard and put a garbage pail on their head and walk out to the street? And I said, none. She said, honey, that's no accident. And I said to her, would you come and talk to some friends of mine? And I gathered a tea. And anyway, long story. I've written a book. It's all in the book. You can read all about that. But the point was, after that, I started going to everything I could. And I subscribed to the Tri-State Defender. I just didn't know and understand. And I'm a fifth-generation Memphian. I didn't understand how black-white worked in my city. And it was a learning process, and out of it, I had heard about this panel of American women, and we gathered a bunch of wonderful, wonderful women. I hardly knew them before they joined the panel. And we created this program, and it was just wonderfully successful. Did I answer that well? I'm sorry.
I think so, as you always do. Dr. Smith, in 1964, as was mentioned, you were one of the first African-American students at Rhodes College. What was life like for you as a student on this campus?
I had the opportunity to be in a situation where I was at one time the most different student on campus, and at the same time, one of the ones who was trying to be just like everybody else. Of course, that couldn't happen. We were supposed to play Millsaps. You know that's an arch enemy. And I was on the team. Of course, I was on the bench on the team. The other guy could play real well. And Dean Jones called us into his office. And he said, no, Dean Deal called us into his office. He said, look, we'd like you boys to do everything. You know, if you knew Dean Deal, he had a pipe in his mouth, and he would take these deep breaths. Kobe, Lorenzo, we want y'all to be just like everybody else here. We want you to do everything every other student does here. Of course, you know, we want you to rush the fraternities. We want you to do all of that. Now, the fraternities can take boys with red hair and 6 toes on their left foot if they want to. We can't make them accept you, but we want you to go everywhere and be in everything. So, you know, since we had drank the Kool-Aid, we thought that was the thing to do. We went ahead and tried to do everything. And unfortunately, I had met people like Mike before I met the real students. And so I read an FBI report the other day, which was provided to me by the author of a book called The Spy in Canaan. And it said that Kobe Smith was brilliant. However, he was upset because, and bitter because he had written an article in the Southwestern that said, as hard as he had tried to be immersed in the social situation at Southwestern, that he was upset that he was not accepted. Well, the students did not see me the same way. I mean, you're talking about kids from Georgia, Texas, Alabama, everywhere else, Mississippi. And many of them had never been in this situation before where they had seen someone who was not their parents' employee. They didn't know how to handle it, and I didn't know how to handle it either. I just wanted to be just like everybody else. And unfortunately, that was cutting off a bigger piece of tobacco than I could chew. So anyway, Lorenzo and I turned out to have the first probably black student association in the country. Every time a class was over, we'd have a meeting, we'd meet up so we could talk to each other. We had gone to high school together, and we had enjoyed a wonderful friendship. So it was great, to be honest with you. This was a tremendous experience. It gave us an opportunity to be those special boys who went to the white school, and at the same, which is great with the girls, that helped out a lot. Then at the same time, we were those guys that the girls decided that on the campus they had gotten together and said, nobody go out with them. Well, Dean Deal had called us in and said, boys, you know, we'd like you to do everything, rush the fraternities, but you can't live in the dormitory and you can't go out with the girls. So I had a friend. There was another girl here as a special student named Maureen Wilson. She had already graduated from Jackson State. And Maureen said to me, she said, Kobe, the girls tell me you will not talk to them. So she said, are you funny? I said, no, I'm not. And so she said, well, why won't you talk to him? I said, the dean called us in and he said, we don't want you to live in the dormitory and we don't want you to go out with the girls. Well, she said, what he was saying is he didn't want you to go out with the boys or the girls. Mm-hmm. That tickled me. I said, oh my goodness, I hadn't thought of it that way. So at any rate, we proceeded to develop a lot of interesting friendships. Some of the people that you have mentioned, and all were not students. You mentioned Carrie Fowler, who was a participant in the sanitation workers strike. Carrie was a wonderful red-headed kid who was always very open and honest, and he'd come and he'd say, can I attend this with you? Carrie taught in our Freedom School. The Freedom School was on Thomas and Firestone in one of the toughest North Memphis neighborhoods. Carrie would go out there and he'd teach art and reading and literature. He just was a wonderful person. Jocelyn also makes me think about another Rhodes Southwestern graduate, Happy Jones. And Happy was one of those people, I know you're going to mention the name at some point. She and Modine Thompson were people very close to me. Modine Thompson, who is right now a little under the weather. However, these people were so much in our corner and so interested in us, they'd help us do everything. We had a wonderful life. The campus was a sanctuary. You didn't have to worry about the police. You didn't have to worry about any gangs. You didn't have to worry about anything as long as you were on campus. Until Lorenzo went down to Gammons and the man pulled a gun on him. Well, Lorenzo's kind of a big guy. And I was telling Mike, I said, man, Lorenzo not only was the defensive end and offensive end, he was the long snapper. This guy had beaten Claude Humphreys, who was recently inducted into the NFL Hall of Fame as a high school student. So he could handle his hands and feet very well. And we were best friends, and we go everywhere together. So Maureen had said, I want to tell you something. She said, if I walk across this campus butt naked, would nobody say anything? If you do it, they're taking you to jail. She said, no laws have ever been passed against anybody but black men. Now, I'm a political science major, so I get simplistic in my thought. So, well, I understand what you're saying. I don't I don't want to let that be the case. So she said, from now on, understand that you're 18 years old and you haven't ever had enough of anything. So if the girls want to talk to you, you can talk. So she gave me permission to be outgoing. And that was very interesting because what happened then, Russ, and the rest of you, was that the only girl that talked to me on the campus was a young lady named Carol Pickens White. And Carol's was raised by a lady who was sister-in-law to my aunt. And Carol told the kids on campus, she and Bo Scarborough, Carol said, be nice to him, this is my brother. And that impacted on me quite powerfully because we were trying to avoid contact. After Dean Deal had talked to us, Lorenzo and I would study leave the library and study in the visiting team quarters. So one day this girl, after chapel over here, incidentally, we went back across the lace layer was right by the breezeway near the refectory. And so on the way over there, this young lady said, I would like to get to know you. So I said, well, I'm sorry, I'm playing football, I have a job, I have to go over to Lemoyne to study. I really just don't have time to talk to you. She did not take no for an answer. And so she kept talking. She said, well, I can let you use my car. I said, what? I couldn't put gas in your car. So she said, here's $5. Well, that got my attention. My allowance was about $10 a week, I think, which included what I had to pay for making copies of reference books and everything. So I did not realize that equality did not make you equal just because you were here in the school. You were not on the same playing field. I found out later that while I was studying in the library, waiting on reference books, that there were people who owned reference books and that the fraternities already had all the tests. So I was trying to compete, and it was an uphill struggle. But this young lady said, okay, do that. So we had a BSA meeting, Lorenzo and I, right after she said that. And I showed him the key. I said, man, we can go over to Lemoyne in style. We don't have to wait on the bus. So he says, okay, let's go over there. We went down the main drive over near Palmer and walked up to the car. It turned out that the car had on it on the side, official use only, Miss Mississippi, Miss America pageant. Wow. So that's when Lorenzo started to, I'd never seen him run as fast as he did that. So I said, hey, wait a minute. Now, Lorenzo's a big guy. He's 6'3", 215. To me, at that time, that was big. Now, it's not like it is now, where I have no hair and a stomach. So I said, man, look, come on back. If it's a joke on us, we'll get the last laugh. So we drove the car back around and parked it behind the fraternity houses, took the $5, caught a bus, and went over to Lemoyne.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. All right. Carol, you were a freshman at Southwestern in Memphis in 1968. What inspired you to take up the cause of engaging in the sanitation worker strike?
Well, this will capitulate right into Baron and Nikos's laps. When I was 17, I was selected to be an exchange student to Germany. And I went with 99 other American kids from all over the United States and lived in a village or a town, Wolfsburg, where the big Volkswagen factory was in those days. And I lived 14 kilometers from the East Zone, which was barbed wire, makes the fence that someone in office is interested in completing look like a cakewalk compared to what had been put between East Germany and the West Zone. And I saw that, and I went with my German family across the zone and went into Berlin and crossed Checkpoint Charlie and so forth and so on. And it was a powerful experience in realizing what happens when you don't have the freedoms guaranteed to you, like we do, like I took for granted in my daily life. And in addition to that, the family that I lived with, of course, at some point when I could speak German well enough to ask a few questions, I inquired about their participation in World War II, because the father was the same age as my own father, who had been a conscientious objector and therefore was a chaplain on a ship in the Navy during the war. And I saw a number of pictures of my beloved German father in a Nazi uniform. He was 19. He was one of the people of the troops that marched into Russia in the winter. Out of thousands, there were something like 400 that came back, and he was one of those 400 because he was young and he was resilient and tough. And my German mother was actually Polish, and she and her mother walked from Poland to Berlin, thinking it would be safer there, and along with her father, who was much older. And he was killed in an American bombing raid in Berlin. And after that experience, I had been hoping that something was going to give me permission to be what I wanted to be. I didn't know how to do it. I was enmeshed in a social life in a high school in San Antonio, and I kept thinking, how do I accomplish that? And that experience gave me the ticket to go ahead and participate in what I truly believed in. And at the time, San Antonio is a military town. It was during the Vietnam War. My father was an extremely right-wing Republican hawk. It was really a terrible time for my relationship with him. But I knew that I had to get out of there and stay out to involve myself in anti-war activities, and not so much the civil rights. But when I got here, I remember as a kid hearing the phrase Little Rock, and I thought, what does that mean? What does that mean? And then eventually found out what it meant. And when we drive through the South on our way to our grandmother's in North Carolina, I would say, Mother, look, they have colored water in the fountains here. And we would run to the colored bathroom and the colored water fountain, and only to say, but it's just regular water. It's not colored at all. And that's how far from, we lived as I said earlier, we lived in a town that was 50% Hispanic. It was a different kind of culture. So I arrived here with that in my background and met all of that creative group of people. And I did go through Rush, and when it got to be time to pledge, I found out that blacks, Jews, and Asian folks could not be considered for membership in Tri-Delt, which was what I was pledging. And I thought, they can't even be considered? And that was the end of the line for me. I remember lying under a banquet table in the Tri-Delt house thinking, I got to get out of here. What am I going to do? It was all night long. And so I did go out and I did tell the president of Tri-Delt that I couldn't participate because it was wrong. And she cried because she knew it was wrong. And yet we were, as you were saying, Cody, earlier, that it was a world that you just didn't quite know the path out of it. And what I've joked about for years is that we took all the rules and threw them out the window, whether it was civil rights, anti-war, the sexual revolution, et cetera, and we threw the roadmaps out, and we had no roadmap to go forward. It was like we had paper bags on our heads, and we were just blindly making our way. And fortunately, we had some people like Jameson and Michael McLean and Carl Walters, who were religion professors here, who urged us to hang in there and do what you believe and be safe. And they were very concerned with our safety. I never felt any fear I remember at Mason Temple walking in there, and there weren't so many white folks in there, Cody, right? And walking in and thinking, whoa, this is a different world. And it was high emotion and, very, very tense situation. And yet I personally felt no fear at all except from the white people out there. I was afraid of them. When we marched in front of 100 North Main, a guy, a white businessman said, "What's a nice little white girl like you doing marching with these people?" And, we had been carefully schooled to, nonviolent, don't confront these people, just stand for your beliefs and move on. And especially after the riots and looting had broken out, we were extremely careful about what our next moves were going to be.
Thank you so much. Calvin, could you describe, I've mentioned that you were a very important part of the group that became known as the Invaders. Could you describe the way in which the Invaders were portrayed by the local press and perhaps why? And how did you navigate being a reporter who knew the facts regarding the Invaders' mission and activities and as a member of the group? In other words, how did you pull that off?
I'm trying to gather my thoughts because I'm sitting here and I'm listening to everyone's explanation of how they went to school, and it is just dawning on me that what they're describing as an event that took place in their life or something that they met. I lived in South Memphis. The only college we had was Lemoyne and Owen College. And everyone over there was black. I'm going to answer your question, but I got to tell you what my dilemma is.
Say what you need to say.
And they're describing things that they're running into for the first time. And I'm thinking, well, when I went to Memphis State University, and I thought I was going to be an English major and a journalist, I had an instructor tell me that he was dividing his class into 3 sections. The people who would make A's, the people who would make B's, and the people who would make C's. This is a true story. I didn't get into a section. Now, my mother's an English major. I call myself pretty good at journalism. But I didn't get into a section. That was one of my first experiences in college. It wasn't like Kobe's. And he and I got to talk because he's the one who got me in the Invaders. So I got to talk to him about what the devil were you doing? But I remember standing outside talking to a young lady that was in the class, and 3 white boys just came up and they just sat and they just stood there and they just listened as I talked to her. I could never figure out why they were standing there. Later I would come to understand that I guess they thought they had to protect her or make sure that I wasn't saying something that didn't make any sense. So as I listen to what you all are saying, I'm saying, you guys live in a different world over here. South Memphis wasn't like that. You could walk up on our campus, a white person, and of course, we would accept you simply because we had been taught all our lives that you were white. We were supposed to accept you. No one was supposed to question why you were there. In fact, if you were there, you had something important to do. So it's like it's mind, but I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, what is going on? Where am I? Is this the Memphis, Tennessee that I knew? Or is this where is this? And I'm only saying that just so that everyone will understand that the experience of white people coming into this business of integration and all of this is not quite the same for black people. It wasn't, it was a way of life for us. We understood that there were things we could not do, should not do, would not be allowed to do. We understood those things. When I went to, like I said, when I was at Memphis State University, I have to remember to call it University of Memphis. Life was quite different. When you're, I was a brainiac out of Father Bertram, but when I got to the University of Memphis, I never got above a C for a grade. And I don't quite, this business of interaction, there was very little interaction between blacks and whites at the University of Memphis. Now, I don't know what y'all doing over here, but it didn't occur like that over there. And I think many of you know that because many of you know I think we call them the Memphis 13 or whatever, but you all know about that. You all know how the blacks at the University of Memphis had to literally take it over just to get the people to recognize that they were black. But I just wanted to say that because I think I'm on the wrong panel now. Your question about the invaders. Your question about the invaders.
You're right where you need to be.
The invaders weren't exactly what everybody thinks they were in terms of how mystical or big or whatever. They were young men. Now I know why Kobe had a hard time getting along with Deion and Charles Cabbage. But they were, Cab was on somebody at the time who was a college graduate. He was out of Morehouse. John was home from Vietnam, and I'm still in school. So we're like talking about things every day, but we're talking about them from a black perspective, not from a white perspective. And from the black perspective, we were always trying to achieve something or become a part of something or have the advantages that were offered to everyone else. We weren't black people attending a white school too and privileged. We were black kids attending black schools with every now and then you have a white teacher, and all you had was what was available to you as a person attending a black school, a black person. I got fortunately because when I was at the university, Father Bertram was a Catholic high school, so naturally I would go to the Newman Foundation, which was a Catholic organization. And of course, I'm the only black over there, so they all are going to try to make me feel as if I'm part of the Newman Foundation. I really wasn't part of the Newman Foundation. They needed a cook during lunch hour, and they offered me the job of cooking. Well, after a while, a young man by the name of Bill and I, we got to talking, and he realized that I wasn't exactly happy with the idea that I would cook. Because, of course, when you're talking integration, you don't ever want to think that all black people are ever going to do is be maids and cooks. So Bill decided, since he worked at the Commercial Appeal, that he was going to do something about this. I'll take you down that cattle, we're going to get you a job. Well, I didn't know anything about the Commercial Appeal other than it was a newspaper. Other than that, and I didn't read much. I was too busy trying to pass some English courses at my mom. I could not, when your mom's an English instructor, you cannot fail any test in English. You just can't do it. So he takes me down to the Commercial Appeal to talk to them about they ought to hire me. Well, it's just a big paper. It's nice. I'm not thinking black and white or anything, right? I'm just thinking, I need some money. He introduces me to everyone and tells Angus McCarron, who happened to be the copy editor, not the copy editor, but the city desk editor at the time, that, you know, here's a young man. We don't have any blacks, or in those days, Negroes on the staff doing anything. We did have, and I never have understood it, George Harden, who used to run the Tri-State Defender, started out, or he didn't start out at the Tri-State, started out, when I say started out, I made a mistake. He became editor of the Tri-State, but he was at the Commercial Appeal working as a copy editor. I don't know what you all know about journalism or things like that, but newspapers used to be really big. They used to have a lot of people working for them. And if I write a story, I just gave the story to the people at the copy desk, and they would put the headline on the story. And that's what George was doing. George would put headlines on stories. He was there when I got there. He wasn't ever a reporter. Well, Angus decided that maybe we'll think about that. We'll see what we do about that. Bill, being the person, Bill Nurse is his name, being the person that he was, he went on to own Dairy Queens. I should have went on to own Dairy Queens instead of becoming a reporter. But anyway, Bill kept worrying Angus about, let's have someone black working. And evidently it worked, because Angus said, I want you to come to work. And this is what you want to do. I don't know if you know much about journalism or copy clerks, but all I really had to do was move one story from out of the reporter's desk over to another desk in a big basket where you put the story, where the people would take it and they would proofread them, make sure the English was correct, punctuation was correct and all of that. And then they put headlines on them. And then you take them upstairs and give them to the guys who ran them on the presses so they could make the little steel stuffed plates that turn out the story. That's what a copy clerk does. That's what I was doing. Well, I had a young man, you all may know him, Tom Bustler. He's a photographer. He used to be a photographer, or he probably still is a photographer. I don't know if he's working for the commercial still or not. But he too was a young man. And he wanted to be a photographer. So he and I talked Angus into letting me work as an editor, a journalist, a reporter, and letting him work as a photographer. Well, Dr. King got assassinated. Commercial Appeal didn't have anyone they could send out that was African American that could learn what African Americans thought about what was being done. So I said, Calvin, you want to be a reporter? We got an assignment for you. Buster, you want to be a photographer? We got an assignment for you. That's how I became a reporter. That's how Buster became a photographer. That's how I went to work for several years, working for the Commercial Appeal and working for the St. Petersburg Times. In the meantime, while I was working at the Commercial Appeal, I lived in South Memphis, where Charles Cabbage lived. Kobe calls me one day and tells me that we need a reporter. What do you mean you need a reporter? We want to write a paper. Who is we and what paper are we writing? Well, we is this group called the Black Organizing Project, which everybody now knows is the Invaders. They needed someone to put together the stories and the issues confronting the black community. And for some strange reason, they thought I could write. Now, I tell everybody, writing, being a journalist, I'm not trying to degrade it or anything. But if you ever notice, they just all write simple sentences, and one sentence is a paragraph. They aren't exactly putting out textbooks or writing novels or that kind of thing. You just write one sentence and that's a paragraph. You write another sentence and that's a paragraph. And by the time you've written 7 of them, you've written a story. So it was kind of a normal life to me. I didn't think it really required a great deal. I'm not the best person to talk to when you talk about when you want to be a journalist. Now, you learn as you go how to use adjectives and reword things. But they decided, when I say they, the Invaders, Charles, John, Kobe, they decided they wanted someone to write. Well, it seemed like a good idea to me. As I've always been a person who read books. And I had read enough of people from Richard Ellis to Sam Greenlee. I had seen Loretta Hansberry's movie. And I was just pissed. I thought we lived in a very unfair world. And I don't want to hurt your feelings, but I think we still do. And I said, I'll go to work and I'll help you guys out. I'll write whatever it is you want to have written and whatever we do. And that's how I became a member of the Invaders and worked at the Commercial Appeal. And it proved to be to our advantage simply because in the old days, when you had in the newspaper room, they had a police monitor. And it ran all day. And I would know when someone had gotten shot, when someone had been robbed, someone had been whatever. A student had drowned. Did you call the police? We heard at the same time they heard. So we knew which story we wanted to cover. Well, because of the Invaders, which never was a membership group, you never had to apply for membership. You never had to pay any dues. All you had to do was be interested in the black problems facing Memphians.
No initiation.
And you were an invader. Well, the Invaders spent a great deal of time trying to talk to the people that might code his name for you all, such as Reverend Lawson, a good friend of ours, because we all used to work for him with the war on poverty. We kept trying to get funded to be a real organization. We were all college young people. We were not thugs in the street. We were not hoodlums in the street. In fact, we sometimes thought we had better sense than our parents. Because our parents didn't get to do what? Thank you, someone said it. Mm-hmm. They didn't get to go to school. They worked hard so I could go to school. So Kobe could go to school. And when we went to school, we started reading books. We started learning about other societies. We didn't travel to Germany for anything. We didn't spend any time in France for anything. As close as we got to France and Germany was a geography book. But when you start reading, you all of a sudden learn that there are other things going on in the world everywhere. And we decided that, I think Kobe, if he'll remember correctly, if he'll correct me if I'm wrong, the only reason he is in Memphis, Tennessee is because Cab wanted to come back to Memphis. They were at Morehouse listening to Dr. King give a speech. Cab decided he wanted to come back to Memphis and help straighten Memphis out. Kobe, of course, was going to get in a car and go to Chicago or someplace. Where were you going? I don't know where you were going. He was going someplace. But he wasn't coming back to Memphis. He just came because when Cab said, we got to straighten Memphis out. Memphis got its own problems. We're not going anywhere. And that's how he got stuck here. Other than that, he'd probably be a professor up north somewhere. Mm-hmm. But that was sort of how we got started, and that is sort of how we became involved in the movement, because we lived in South Memphis. Much of what the Invaders did took place in South Memphis. We tried to do some things in North Memphis, but it's just hard. I don't know, you all may not know this, but there's a big difference between blacks in North Memphis and blacks in South Memphis.
I've heard that before.
Yeah, he's heard that before, but there's a big difference, whether people want to admit it or not. And they will tell you when you talk to them that there is a big difference. But we spent a great deal of time talking about things that were important in terms of education, employment, health care, housing, the same things you all hear about today.
You know, Calvin, that is part of what we really want to make sure we get to, is how, when you think about some of those core fundamental issues that you just mentioned from 50 years ago, thinking about, and I want you to continue, and then I want some other people to respond. Thinking about 1968 and thinking about 2018, what are some of the similarities and perhaps some of the differences in our society? Continue.
Oh, I was just trying to explain to everyone that that's what the invaders were about. They were not about what the press wrote, said they were about. They were not, quote, unquote, militants. Mm-hmm. They were all, that's y'all's graduate over there. He was an invader. And when you look at the other people, you will find that they all got college degrees. They weren't running around the streets talking about burn. Kobe helped to give us a bad name. Because Kobe was probably the one that the newspapers figured out, let's get him to talk, because he loves to talk. Most of the people don't love to talk, and I'm about as nervous as I can be sitting here talking to you all, because I don't like talking, period. I've known Jocelyn Wordsworth a long time. I used to work for the Memphis Community Relations Commission. I've known Mike Cody a long time. I know exactly who they are. They probably see me twice every year, if they ever see me that often. And I don't really talk to them about anything. And I know everything. I know a bunch of people that they know. I've heard their names mentioned in a lot of places. But Kobe is the one who helped us to get to be the name militants, because Kobe is the one who got on Channel 5 one day and decided that what we need to tell everybody is, let them burn it. Burn, baby, burn, and let it burn. And everybody thought that we thought like he thought. We did think like he thought, but we weren't advocating that. We just simply understood that we can't think of a time in the history of mankind when there has been some civil difficulty in anybody's country that you don't end up with a what on your hand. You don't end up with some physical violence. Yep. And I don't care who you are, and I don't care what you think about yourself. Wherever you come from, you know that in your country, in order to get the changes made, it took what? It took some violence. I like to tell people, it took the shedding of some blood to make sure y'all could get to heaven. So we just thought like that. We weren't advocating anything. We just went to school and we just learned that it's going to happen, regardless. And we were not at all shocked and or surprised. That's why I say I'm kind of shocked when I listen, because I'm telling you, this ain't the way the discussion goes in the black community. The black community knows if it's going to get anything done, something is going to have to get overturned. That's just the history of mankind, not the history of white, black, blue, or green. It's the history of mankind, and we don't argue. But
the sad thing,
you guys can answer the other part.
The sad thing about what you're needing to share is I can't believe we're in 2018. I couldn't find my Kerner Commission report somewhere in my library. I was looking all over except for this thing. But we're dealing with the same things.
Amen.
And we know how to fix it.
Amen.
We do know this isn't something we don't know how to do. We just won't. And I think it's our continued prejudices. I think it's our continued racism, which I think is the biggest problem of that America faces still. We know the solutions. We don't have the will to get it done. And what amazes me about it is that it's in our self-interest, everyone's self-interest, white, black, everybody. It's in our self-interest to fix the problems. I was telling some girlfriends who were here just yesterday morning, I don't want sick people running around my grandchildren. I want them well. I want them to have health care so they don't give whatever they got to my kids, you know. I want commerce working, and if you deny up in Kustoff's district food stamps like they're threatening to do, then all disposable money has to go to the food, and then you don't have anything left over to to go to the Walmart and buy T-shirts. I mean, you know, it just is insane to me that we don't try and fix the same problems we've been dealing with since Dr. King was trying to tell us what they were. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you and get on the soapbox.
No, thank you. Others thinking about?
Well, in the last week, there was a Jesuit named Gregory Boyle who came here from LA. He is in charge of, runs a program called Homeboy Industries. And I would say that man, Barron and I were listening to a book that he wrote that was called Barking at the Choir. And essentially it's about young men and women who are gang members and Hispanic, Black, Asian, etc., white, and what are their choices? What do they think is going to happen? Jail or dead? Those are what they think. That is a very disturbing couple of options. And Gregory Boyle talked at great length about what are the things that cause us to have the gangs and these very disenfranchised people. And he talked a tremendous amount about trauma in the home, physical abuse of all types, mental illness, and just the pressures of being without. You know, like you said, Mr. Taylor, that worrying about where's your baby's milk going to come from? You're going to have it for tomorrow? What about the diapers that aren't paid for by the EBT and so forth? And he talked about what it was like to work with these people and address their real needs, which were housing, counseling, and jobs. And you know, being able to recover, being able to see that you had a value as a person, and so forth and so. I mean, this could go on for days, not just hours, but days. But that to me is so important here. We have in all these years, the 50 years, we still haven't resolved the housing, the counseling, and the job situation. We've made a teeny dent in education, but it's very disturbing, you know, the school system being all a mess again. And so it seems to me that you've got to address those things and learn that. I mean, one of the things that Father Boyle said was, when people say, why did that kid in Austin shoot those people, put those bombs together? Why did, you know, the people, a guy shoot folks in a church, etc.? And he said, why? Because they're mentally ill. They are sick people. You can't just vilify them. You have to say what caused it. Extreme poverty and privation, abuse, and you know, lack of anything, and those things must be addressed. And one of the things that he said over and over that I thought made a tremendous difference in it, and I realized it actually occurred to me when I was 18 years old. He said, when you go to the margin to work with the marginal people, do not expect to change them. Let them, that man back there, change me and the way I see things. That's what I learned back then from these people that put their lives, their families, their jobs, their everything on the line for justice.
Thank you so much. We want to give people an opportunity to ask questions in the audience. But before doing so, please join me in thanking our wonderful, wonderful
think we have microphones available if you have a question for any of our panelists. Yes, ma'am.
I'm coming with a mic if you want to.
I'd like to hear more about the invaders. In the early 1980s, I was running a drop-in center for homeless people, and Willie Henry, who's now an aide to Congressman Cohen, we called him St. Willie. He was so wonderful. And it was years later, like 2 years ago, that he told me that he was one of the invaders.
Correct.
And so I will certainly agree with you. You had some really fine people there, but I'd like to know more about what you did and why it was so controversial.
It wouldn't be controversial today. Many of the things that are being said today were said then, and when they got said, people got upset about it. You have no right to say that. When I came back to Memphis and encouraged Charles Cabbage to come back, I came with the purpose of trying to create a Black United Front. That was the program that Stokely Carmichael was going to take to Washington, D.C. I theorized that Memphis was a better organized city because I had grown up at the feet of Ben Hooks, A.W. Willis, Russell Sugarman, and Maxine Smith. So I thought, man, we could do a better job of this in Memphis world. I know everybody. We've got everything going. So I knew Jim Lawson. I knew a lot of people. I knew about Map South. I knew about efforts to organize that were going on. Of course, I did not realize that the very people who we thought we were helping would be enemies of the process. I'm so glad you mentioned John T. Fisher. There were a lot of white people who were receptive to change. Jameson Jones, receptive to change. But by the same token that he was receptive to change, Jameson called me into his office one day and he said, Kobe, now the rest of them don't want to talk to you about this, but they asked me to call you in and ask you if you intend on burning the school down. So I said, Jameson, Dean Jones, this school is made out of stone and mortar. You couldn't burn this down, you'd have to blow it up. So he said, Jameson said, I'm so relieved. But the fact is, we came in with a good deal of innocence. The first real tragic event that we had was we had John B. Smith and Charles Cabbage arrested for inciting to riot. Well, the assignment they had that day was to go down to the police department and ask to create a police athletic league so that we could reduce the tension between the police and the community. We thought that this was, that's no different than people at Black Lives Matter saying, look, let's get something to keep the cops from shooting down black kids. That's happening today, men and women. That's still happening today. It's no different than it was when Ida B. Wells went to Susan B. Anthony and said, can you support the anti-lynching movement? Susan B. Anthony said, but I'm more interested in getting women the right to vote. She said, yeah, but what difference does it make if you can vote if you are hanging from a tree? So, we can be subtle if we want to. All of us know what the problems are. Instinctively, white, black, everybody knows what the problems are. If you don't see any black people in the business you work in the company you work for, there's something wrong. When I first got to Rhodes, to Southwestern, the black people who embraced us were all maids, janitors, cafeteria help, and athletic department help. So the people who protected Lorenzo and me were basically the people who worked in the gym and on the yard. And they thought they saw something in us. They thought we had potential. They said, these are going to be senators and governors and presidents. Now, we didn't know Barack was going to make it. And even after he made it, he couldn't be Barack. He had to be as quiet and white and I'm from both sides. I'm not a black man sitting in this chair. I got to make white people happy. He didn't make us happy, as Calvin would probably tell you. We didn't get anything out of the deal. When Clinton was in, we didn't get anything out of the deal. Clinton was, there was another girl that I should have mentioned here who was from Rhodes. In fact, she was Miss Memphis in the beauty pageants, Debbie Sale. She went down and she involved herself in the marches. She's very attractive, looked like Sophia Loren. But it didn't matter who you were or what you were. The resistance to progress is based on people who feel like you are threatening their potential. Every day in football practice, I weighed 140 pounds. And let me tell you, that 140 pounds was hard gained because I had to gain 15 pounds to make the weight limitation. So I gained 15 pounds to play football. And I wish I'd played golf. There was no Tiger Woods. There was no Tiger Woods. And most of the heroes that I had were baseball players. But let me tell you about what integration really means. You think about integration as a black person coming into a white organization. Integration, the best example of integration is America, is when the National League, Baseball League, decided it would try to get the people who attended baseball games to get the black people to come to the white league game. You know, the Negro Baseball League drew more people every Sunday than the major leagues did. So this is the best example of integration in America. All of a sudden, they take Jackie Robinson and they put him in the Dodger uniform, and people in St. Louis who were black or Cincinnati or Cleveland or anywhere else rush to the baseball stadium so they can see a black player playing in a game that was a white man's game. So now, Mike and I didn't talk about this when we were younger. Now, I have to recognize that both of us are now older. It tickles me to see you with white hair. It does not tickle me to see me with no hair. But some of these issues were important issues then. Lucius Birch was quite a mentor. One night, the Klan had a rally over in Overton Park at the Rotund. 2 white students came and got me, and we went over there to the meeting. I got a chance to meet Robert Shelton. Robert Shelton told me, he said, you know, you're very brave to come here. I'm delighted to meet you. What's your name? I told him my name. He said, look, he said, you came out here, the only black person out here. You are very brave. I said, no, sir, I think you're very brave. He said, why would you say that? I said, you out here in pitch black night in that white Jeep. So he thought about it, and he said, look, the rest of these people out here hate you. He said, this is a business to me. I didn't understand what he meant. He was selling robes and hats and selling the literature. It was a business. He said, I don't hate you. In fact, if you ever need my help, and he autographed me a Klansman on the horse reared up. He said, if you ever need me, I shall need you, Grand Klux or whatever they call him. I need him right now. We need him. We're so glad to get Forrest down at the park, we don't know what to do. But our problem is not with Forrest, his statue. Our problem is with living, breathing white people. When I left Atlanta, when I left SNCC to come back to Memphis, the organization had decided that whites had left the organization. The reason they left was because after Freedom Summer, the black organizers in SNCC mainly Stokely Carmichael, H. Rap Brown, and Cleveland Sellers, and a few others, decided to go against John Lewis and ask white people to go back into their communities and organize their mothers and fathers. If your mom and dad is a racist, guess who knows it first? Answer me, somebody. Y'all don't hear me. You know it if your mama and your daddy are racist, don't you? No child can grow up without that. Now, you know, my wife and I laugh sometimes. We saw a picture of, you may have seen it in the paper the other day. They had a black father and a white father holding their babies. The black baby was so cute, I looked at the picture, I said, that's really sweet. I miss when my boy was that age. Then I looked at the little round-haired white baby. He sure was cute too. And his daddy had a beard on. He was standing there and looking like he was proud as all get out. And I want you to notice one thing when you go out in life. When you see black people look at little white children, they look at them with pride and with happiness. There's no hate involved in that. But I see grown white people look at little black children and they could hate a child. How could you hate a kid? Now, I went to a lot of schools. This was not my first school. I went to an elementary school that had over 3,000 kids, just north of here. That school is now closed. I went to a high school that had 3,300 kids on 10 acres. It wasn't enough building and wasn't enough school for that to happen. So we know what the problems are, both black and white. So I sent Cab and John down to talk to the police about a police athletic league. It was not that black kids were attacking white policemen. It was not that black people were fighting white people. It was that police were using our community as they were coming into our community as an occupation army. And if you didn't walk the way they wanted you to walk and you didn't talk the way they wanted you to talk, if more than 2 or 3 blacks gathered in a crowd, they had to be disbanded in Memphis, Tennessee. So when 1968 came and the sanitation workers decided to go on strike, which the mayor called an illegal wildcat strike, they were starting to, the police would go and stop the sanitation workers on the way home from work, and they would arrest them, intimidate them, or beat them. And we sat in a room at my house. Calvin was there. Charles Cabbage was there. John Smith was there. We decided that we would put an end to that. Now, we didn't go get guns at that moment and go put an end to it. What we did was we assigned some of our young members, they were merely more than teenagers, to go to the job site and escort these sanitation workers safely to the meeting or home. So that's what the invaders did. A lot of this was not dramatic. I mean, it wasn't high noon at the OK Corral. It was simply saying we have a right to defend ourselves and our people. We were so excited about the sanitation workers, mainly because these were relatives. These were friends. These were family members. These were neighbors. And we did not see them as Henry Loeb saw them, as people who had defied the sanctity of municipal government. We saw them as friends, family, and the parents of friends and family. The fact is that we were raised to solve problems, and we tried to present ourselves. I was a political science major. And like Calvin, the first time I realized, a professor told me that I could not go to graduate school in political science. Don't even consider that. He says, you'd be lucky to get a D out of my class. I'd never had a D in my life. I didn't know what a D was. And I was an overachiever. I thought I was going to serve my country. I wanted to be a great American. I didn't know that white people discriminate not only against black people, but against white people too. That was a surprise to me. When I learned that, I said, man, these are some mean people. If you could be mad at little black children, little black babies, round heads and their little fat jaws and pretty faces, something got to be wrong with you if you do that. But
we've got to we want to get one more question in, Dr. Smith, just in the interest of time. And
Calvin told you I was long-winded.
I did tell him.
Another? I got you. Okay.
This question is for Mr. Cody. You said you were interested in fighting segregation and working with young men to fight this system. The system that we're in is successful for white people, so why would they fix it?
I couldn't hear what the last.
You said I said this system that we're living in, it works for white people.
Yeah.
Why would they be interested in fixing it?
I see. I think it's what someone else has said before.
I think Jocelyn said it too.
Yeah.
They should be interested in fixing it because the world is not just black and white. The world is everything, and we now have to compete.
That's okay.
I'm sorry.
He had the right answer.
Okay, go ahead.
I think it's what is obvious. You can't live in a community of people with some people that are treated badly, because it destroys the character and integrity of the place you live in. And until everyone has opportunity to sort of rise and to be the best they can, the whole community can. And so a white person can understand if black people are mistreated and kept down and not educated and not given health care, that's gonna affect them. It's a personal effect of them. The trouble is with a white person can't have the same empathy about the problem that a black person does. You can have sympathy, you can be interested, you can want to help, but it's hard to have the deep identity and empathy that you need to solve some of these problems. But I have seen a lot of people move a long way toward a better society, and they were not necessarily people that were the victims of that society.
Thank you all so much. We have to close our ceremony, and out of respect for Dr. King and our community, and I happen to know Calvin Taylor loves this song. We have our singers are going to come up and sing Precious Lord to conclude our program. We will have a reception over in the, well, you all know we've been over here in McNeil Hall for not that long, and this is called West Campus. So how about over in the building to the south, right? We don't have a name on it yet, but it's the building right next door. There'll be a wonderful reception. We hope you will join us. Thank you.
Precious Lord.